Friends, first, thank you very much for being here. It's always extremely interesting to be in Hyderabad. I spent more time here than is widely known. The subject for the evening, very interestingly, continues to be of interest 7 decades after partition. It is as if the subject will not go away. And in a sense it won't. There is too much that is still unknown about why that seminal event happened in our history. I don't know how many of you followed the news today, but I think if I took a voice vote and asked whether you would like me to first address the question that has emerged today about why Subhas Bose, there was surveillance on Subhas Bose's family for 18 years or 20 years after freedom. There might be a good number of people who don't want to hear about that before they want to hear about Pakistan. And maybe I will touch upon it later on. There are 2 reasons why Pakistan continues to be of concern to us. I once suggested to an audience in I think it was in America or Canada, that I once suggested to an audience, I think it was in America, when asked that who are our neighbors? Who is India's neighbor? And I made what was then considered an audacious claim that we were actually far that in both psychological as well as practical terms we were closer to America than we were to Pakistan. If you want to go to America, you can take a flight from here, Hyderabad airport, and I think within 16 hours you will be able to reach America. If you want to go to Pakistan, try for 16 months and I'll see whether you... If we had a dream wish, and I think if you took a poll among Indians and asked them who would they prefer as a neighbor, and I think, broadly, the answer would be that if you could relocate Pakistan somewhere in Latin America, that would be great. It would be extremely helpful. On the other hand, there is a country which was 52% of Pakistan till 1971. It's called Bangladesh. Bangladesh is as Muslim a country as Pakistan was or is. Nobody wants to relocate Bangladesh. Today, there is a flight going to Bangladesh from Calcutta, from Delhi, somewhere in the country every hour. There are 4 flights a week, I think, which are scheduled for Pakistan. Not one of them is full. And you can't get a ticket for Dhaka. Why? And this brings us to the very interesting answer. It is not because there are Muslims in Pakistan, because there are Muslims in Dhaka. There are Muslims in Bangladesh. It is because of the nature of the state. That is what is the issue. It is not the nature of the people. If you meet Pakistanis, you come to this extraordinary conclusion that they are exactly like us. Exactly like us. As good, as bad, as emotional, as generous, will take you to their homes without even being invited. My abiding memory of Pakistan is when I went once for a few days for that great test during cricket match during that Vajpayee's time. And I was sitting in the hotel foyer, and suddenly a very worried Indian who had come to watch the cricket comes up to me, really worried. He was a shopkeeper, he owned a shop in Delhi. And I'll have to say this, in Delhi, and I said ki ye pata nahi kya ho gaya hai, probably the first problem as always has started. तो he said, नहीं साहब देखिए मैं तो जहाँ जा रहा हूँ दवाई खरीदने जा रहा हूँ कोई पैसा नहीं ले रहा है. अभी नानारकली में गया था तो साड़ी का दाम कपड़े का दाम इतना था तो कह रहा है कि आधा आप मत लो ये लो. तो he said मैं बड़ा परेशान हूँ तब से. तो बोले किस बात की परेशानी है? He said नहीं मुझे परेशान इसलिए हूँ कि जब पाकिस्तानी दिल्ली आएंगे हम ऐसा खातिर नहीं करेंगे उनका, तो ये बुरा ना मान जाए. That is exactly. And I can't resist this appendage information, that the real partition between India and Pakistan was not in 47. The real partition was 1965. Before 1965, travel was very easy. You needed only a document. In fact, DCM had investments there. Many Indian companies had investments there. The real partition, the wall that came up in 1965 after the war, because there was a huge sense of betrayal in India. Huge sense of betrayal in India. And after the wall became such that we froze everything, including communication. And it is only actually thanks to private sector TV, because spectrum and airwaves don't have partition walls. It is only the private sector television that has reintroduced India and Pakistan to each other. After which we have come to another stunning conclusion, that we are exactly alike because our mothers-in-law are the same. That Saas Bahu you can take into Pakistan is exactly the same. I don't know why they insist on calling themselves Arabs. And this brings me to, I think, the most important part of this, not just the dialectic, but the most important part of the relationship. That the problem between India and Pakistan has nothing to do with Kashmir. The problem between India and Pakistan is nothing to do with geography. The problem between India and Pakistan is ideological. It is the difference between a state which believes in faith supremacy. It may be any faith. In this case it is Islam, but it can be any faith. A nation built around an idea that one faith is supreme. I mean, look, everybody's faith is supreme to the individual. But this supremacy cannot be translated into public space, into constitution. Between an idea that a nation belongs to faith supremacy or the idea that the nation has to defend, protect and believe in faith equality as a principle. Many people use the word secularism. Some people have this definition of that. Some people have another definition of that. It doesn't matter to me very much what definition you use. All I know is that the word secularism in our context has nothing to do with the word as it originated. Secularism is a word that emerges from either Voltaire or from Karl Marx. From Voltaire it emerges because the French challenged the church, and it was separation of church and state. And Karl Marx, yet another European, this was a Frenchman, Voltaire, and a German, Karl Marx, who took it to the next stage, which is the complete elimination of the church, the complete elimination of religion as a factor in public life. For us in India, this makes no sense, because for us, faith or secularism is defined not in terms of the conflict between church and state or the elimination of religion, but faith here represents the equality of every religion before the law, and that, I tell you, is the smaller part of it. It is not the constitutional aspect that is the strength of India. It is the social aspect which is the strength of India. The fact that this faith and this belief is ingrained in our philosophy for as far back as you can think, as far back as you can read our philosophy. That is the true strength of the Indian idea. India is not secular because Gandhi was secular. Gandhi was secular because India is secular. That is the key to understanding of India. And I'm proud that India is the only country in what we have audible faith equality. Audible faith equality. Now you might consider that to be a strange kind of phrase. All you have to do is wake up in the morning to understand what I mean. You wake up in the morning here in the city of Hyderabad. First you will hear the azan. Then you will hear the temple bells. Then you will hear the part from the Gurdwara. And then if it is Sunday, you will hear the church bells. There is no other country in the world where you can hear all four. There is no other country in the world. And this is the India that was cut, divided, partitioned, and a wound was created that is not going to heal in our lifetimes because this wound, as I said, is ideological. Today, if any government conceives of settling with Pakistan over Kashmir, just because Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, then I as an Indian Muslim have to lose my faith in India. You cannot abandon me because I am a Muslim. You get my point? You cannot abandon me. And that is why these facts are not going to change on the ground. Very often in Delhi, there are many discussions of how long, this whole conflict resolution is going to take. And I said, given honesty, conflict resolution in Kashmir will take between 5 and 6 seconds. Either it will happen between 5 and 6 seconds, or it will not happen between 5 and 6 generations. What is 5 and 6 seconds? You accept the status quo as the end of the matter, forget the past, accept the status quo and carry on. It will not be a complete answer, but at least it will be a workable answer. Why then has Pakistan deviated from what I would call the belief systems that have been inherent in our thinking, in our philosophy, and in our beliefs? The seminal mistake that we make when we think of Pakistan is to believe that it is a product. We believe that it is a product of a resolution that happened, that took place in Lahore in 1940. That a Muslim League appeared, Jinnah read out a document in which actually there were two Pakistans mentioned. I hope you know that, or maybe you don't. It was not one, but two Pakistans. And then they later said it was a typing error. It happened because there was not enough clarity. They didn't know what they were asking for. That is not when the idea of Pakistan. Nations are not born in a hurry. They require very long gestation periods. Even when there are a British government with forceps trying to create an artificial nation, even then they take a long time. So where did it begin? It began, in my view, in 1739. What happened in 1739? In 1707, Aurangzeb died. If at his grave anyone had predicted that in 15 years' time eunuchs would be dancing in the Red Fort in command, he would have been sent to a lunatic asylum. But that is precisely what happened. Between 1715 and 1725, the Nizams of Hyderabad had declared independence. Quasi-independence. Technically nobody ever declared. But from Rajasthan right up to Hyderabad to Bengal, between 1725 and 1735, the Mughal rule was over. The British did not finish Mughal rule. The British only arrived to bury it. It was dead for some time. It was comatose for some time. In 1739, what happened? In 1739, a Shia leader, Nadir Shah, Shia monarch, turned up and destroyed Delhi. I've often described, please don't quote me to anyone you meet in Delhi, but I've always described Delhi as the largest refugee camp in history. Nobody ever actually belongs to Delhi. Delhi has been denuded of its local process begins in 1739 with the massacre. Now, what is the consequence of that massacre? Do you think you can shut that door? Rather than, I don't know why it keeps getting open. What happens? This massacre is not simply defeat in a battlefield. वो तो होता रहता है. Somebody wins, somebody loses. That massacre signals for the first time to a Muslim elite, which has been in power for 500 years till then, that the empire as they knew it is over. Why is it over? Because if you cannot protect the citizens of your capital city, then you're not in a position to protect anyone. It's very simple. And if you cannot protect the citizens of your realm or empire, then you're over. Then you're dead. The Mughals, had a tremendous strategic sense. The reason why we had security of the subcontinent for 200 years was because of Akbar. He's the first man to have the strategic sense to build forts along the Indus River. At Attock. He was the first man to place guns and artillery on the Torkham Ridge. Torkham Ridge is on the other side of Khyber. I've been there. And if you place a park of artillery there, you can hit at anyone entering along the mountain routes. Now that is foresight and strategic sense. You ford and create fortresses. Where was the fortress of Attock created? Not arbitrarily. It was created at the shallowest point of the Indus. Why the shallowest point of the Indus? Because that is where the invaders used to come from. And why did they come from on the shallowest point? That's because horse could cross without the need of boats. There's a practical sense to everything. And why did the same Mughal Empire by 1739 fall prey to Nadir Shah? Because they lost that strategic sense. And what is the greatest example of strategic failure, of strategic thinking? Do you know what it is? It is something that you go and visit every time you go to Delhi, at least as a tourist. The Red Fort. The Red Fort is the only fort which is designed in history to keep its doors open. It came into effect from about 1660, 1670. The day you turn the security of the nation into a Meena Bazaar, that nation is over. The day you turn the security of nation into Meena Bazaar, story is over. I don't want to get partisan, but some of the things we are finding out now is the last 10 years we had a Meena Bazaar instead of a defense ministry. I'm not joking. The pace at which Manohar Parrikar has had to basically correct the time lag is requiring a lot of attention and a lot of work. Still, after 1739, this elite began to think it had to have an impact. Now, we have this notion that it's an erroneous notion that the heart of the Muslim world is the Arab world. That is the religious heart of it because of the Makkah Sharif and Medina Sharif and so on and so on. But the demographic heart of the Muslim world is not the Midway, not West Asia. The demographic heart of the Muslim world has and always has been South Asia. More Muslims have lived between Afghanistan and Chittagong or Burma than lived in almost the rest of the Muslim world put together. In fact, during the 19th century, the officials, the bureaucrats of the British Empire used to laugh at the Khalif, at the Khalifa, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and said, why are you calling yourself the Caliph? The real Caliph of the Muslims is Queen Victoria, because she rules over more Muslims than you do, which is true actually. So the heart, and not only that, not only the demographic heart, the intellectual heart of Muslim thinking had moved to the madrasas of South Asia from the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, as the Arab world and its power began to decay and began to scatter. It was either the Ottoman Empire in Turkey or India. So, but one of the great walis, one of the great minds, one of the great intellectuals was the head of Delhi Madrasa. His name was Shah Waliullah. This was the last madrasa that was created by Aurangzeb, 1690. So it was comparatively young madrasa, but a very fine and vibrant. Today the same institute is called Delhi College, the premises. And Shah Waliullah, thinking about what would happen to Muslims after the collapse of Mughal rule, came up with a very fascinating theory. Very fascinating theory. This theory had many ages. But among its principal thrusts was one, because of Nadir Shah and because of a history, as you know, the history of Shia-Sunni conflict is another story by itself. When this marries into political power struggles, then it gets an added dimension. So the renewal of suspicion and conflict with Shias. But the more important point was fear of the rise of both Hindu political power. I use the term loosely because it's a shorthand. There was nothing really in India called Islamic or Hindu power. These were just Muslims or Hindu rulers. Particularly the Marathas. That the challenge from the Marathas combined with the Shias, but he offered something very interesting. He offered the theory of distance. For the first time we heard the slogan that would resonate into the 20th century and change and still dictate the events of the 21st. In fact, dictating the events of 21st in a much stronger way, Islam is in danger. Islam is in danger. Actually, theoretically, in doctrinaire terms, this is an absurd fallacy. Because a religion, if it is true, cannot be in danger. However, in the working life of fallacies, the life they get on their own is something quite amazing. But the emergence of fear as the most important factor to shape Muslim thinking began then. Until today, fear remains the principal motivation behind the political thinking of Muslims. If it's not fear of this, then you create fear. And they find political leaderships which have a vested interest in fear. They have a vested interest in fear in this city. But from there emerges, and this theory of distance is what? Because he was also worried about something more important. He was worried about the cultural impact of Hinduism. Islam, after all, comes to two great rivers which represent history as ancient as we can imagine it to be. One is the Nile. In the 8th century, 7th century, and the other is the Ganga. When Islam comes to the Nile, everything that remained of pharaonic civilization crumbles. But in India, something different happens. Islam intervenes with Hinduism to create a new syncretic culture, a syncretic philosophy of survival. Nobody eliminates the other. Instead, a whole and very beautiful pattern of coexistence and a mingling of art forms in the simplest manner in dress, in food habits, in eating, in festivals, in the manner in which we live together. This morning, it is so beautiful. This morning I'm at Delhi airport, and I'm, before boarding the aircraft, what do? You take a quick trip to the loo. And I'm coming out, and the woman, at the ladies section, she is chatting with a man who's a cleaner. And I overhear a bit of conversation. And what is she saying? अरे कैसा हो गया देखो, इन दो परिवार में दुआ सलाम खत्म हो गया. What is the language she's using? The language she is using of a shared culture, of a shared harmony. It has become part of it. She is not educated in highfalutin universities or schools. She is living Indian. She is more Indian than the educated. So it is this culture which emerges out of this combination. But the challenge to this culture and the fear of being overwhelmed begins the theory of distance, and from there, and the theory of distance is that the Muslim should not live within a distance of the Hindu neighbors. So if you can see the smoke rising from his chimney, live further away. A metaphor, but still. I am cutting a very long story short. This theory of distance becomes, by 1906, the politics of separation. What do the British do? The only demand that the British have granted without it ever being demanded was separate electorates. They told a group of Aligarh alumni to go, yaar, ek petition likh ke aao. And Lord Minto said, yeah, sign. Of course, we need it. From there emerges separate electorates. I am sure you know that the only prominent Muslim leader who warned Muslims and said that separate electorates would lead to a division of the country was Jinnah. It's true. At that time, he was the most secular of the whole lot. How he became what he became is another story, but still. From the politics of separation emerges the language of partition, encouraged by Islam in danger, and then emerges, of course, with the help of the British, partition itself, Pakistan. From the beginning, the conflict began in Pakistan, because everyone is aware of these things. I'm not telling you something that is uniquely, it's there as part of our learning, education, a part of our history. So the debate began in Pakistan itself. And many Pakistanis said that we have to define our country. It didn't take any time at all for India to define the Indian Constitution. Why? Because we had clarity. You think that the Indian Constitution was created in 1950? Sorry. The Indian Constitution seeds were laid in the Karachi session of 1931, when all the principles that later on became a constitution were accepted as the charter of the Congress, including the equality of all faiths and so on and so forth. I wish you will hear the speech being delivered today by our Prime Minister at UNESCO. It's a massive reassertion of this syncretic India in Paris. So, but Pakistan, it began the debate. Okay, what are we? Are we a country of Muslims or are we an Islamic nation? Now, what is an Islamic nation? That is the big question. What is an Islamic state? And the answer will shatter more myths than you can count. There has never been in the history of Muslims any Islamic state. Unless you are being very purist and say that the Prophet stayed in Medina during his lifetime for a few years was, yes. But after his death, there never has been. Because, as he himself said any number of times, Islam is a brotherhood, it is not a nationhood. The memory of his death had not vanished. I mean, it never vanishes, but the memory of his body was still warm. His body was still warm when Shias and Sunnis began to fight. Over what? Over political power. Shias still don't accept the first three caliphs. So Islam has never been the basis of political unity. It wasn't in 632 and certainly not going to be today. Tell me, if Islam had been sufficient as a basis of nationalism, why would there be 22 Arab countries? Why? They have language in common, they have faith in common, they have culture in common. There are 22 nations because nations are built on separate identity parameters. Islam has to be, like any religion, bigger than any nation. Hinduism is bigger than India. You don't expect a Nepali Hindu to be loyal to India, do you? Why would he? Why would a Bangladeshi Hindu be loyal to India? He'd be loyal to Bangladesh. Why would an American Hindu? I'm sure many of you have relatives who have become American citizens. Why would an American Hindu be loyal to India? You may have sympathy for India for at least one generation. The children will forget it. But political loyalty is a different story. So this fallacy that Islam can be the basis of a nation state is where the real conflict zone arises between us. Why has Bangladesh moved differently? Because Bangladesh rejected Islam as the basis for nationalism and rejected it through a massive liberation movement, rejected it through a war in 1971. It refused to accept and reinvented itself as ethnic, linguistic nationalism. I may agree with it, not agree with it, doesn't matter. But it's a rational idea. It's a modern idea. It's a modern idea. And I tell you, the real conflict that is going on in the world today, the conflict that has now spread from the Atari border, the Wagah border, right up to Morocco. There is a huge world war going on. A huge world war. And it's about time we woke up and smelt this very, very accurate coffee. Please don't think, let us not fall under the illusion that we are going to protect ourselves and protect whatever prosperity we can achieve by ignoring this conflict. This conflict and its toxic fumes will be borne by both currents and undercurrents. And what is the basis of this? The basis is precisely this. What shall be the nature of the state in the post-colonial dispensation? What shall be the nature of the state? And the difference, as I've argued, is between the romance of regression, which is the dream of an imagined caliphate, the romance of regression versus the ideas of modernity. Where India becomes a template for the post-colonial world is in the fact that India is the first nation to emerge out of the colonial experience and offer the future an idea of modernity. Now, modernity is a nice word to use. Regrettably, in popular parlance, modernity has been confused with clothes. If you wear a bikini, you're modern. I have nothing against bikinis, honestly. That is not modernity. Modernity is 4 basic pillars, non-negotiable. Non-negotiable and not fluctuating, that you can have it for 3 years and then have something else for another 5. The first is democracy. If you don't have democracy and all its freedoms, you cannot call yourself a modern nation. The second is faith equality. The right of every faith, and the right of every faith includes the right of atheists, by the way. If you don't have a faith, most welcome. Please don't have a faith. Just don't come into my arguments, that's all. Most welcome not to have a faith. So the right to have a faith or non-faith is your individual part of your liberties. You know, and by these 2 criteria, China may be a successful country, but it is not a modern nation. And you wait for the next 20 years, China's biggest problems will be how to resolve its own inner conflicts around freedoms. The freedoms of democracy and the freedom of religion. You can see the great conflict going on between Beijing and Hong Kong. Right? And everybody assumes that Beijing will be the victor. Hong Kong will win. Hong Kong will win not because it is small or big. Geography has nothing to do with the power of an idea. Hong Kong will win because it represents the future. And the Chinese will have to find a resolution to this great challenge. At this moment, they are still frightened of Falun Gong. You know what Falun Gong is? It's basically an exercise movement. It's like the Indian state being frightened of Baba Ramdev. Third, modernity. You cannot be a modern nation without gender equality. It's not possible anymore. The days are over when you could impose restrictions on women and clothing restrictions and work restrictions and legal restrictions and treat them as basically as some form of domestic labor. That's over. You can't, it's not possible anymore. And in all these factors, you can see these nations regressing. They've regressed even from the 1950s. Fourth, there is nothing called economic equality. It won't happen. Not even the most Marxist state will ever achieve that. But there is something called economic equity. The poor must feel that they are part of the narrative of prosperity. The poor are not fools. They don't think that, they were born in a hut and they're going to die in a palace. They're not. They don't want to. But if they are born eating only 2 pieces of bread, they have every right to believe that by the time they die, they must have 4 pieces of bread. They have every right to believe that, your children are going to school. Why the hell aren't their children going to school? We are bloody lucky, actually, that they are not angrier than they are. I've often cited this statistic in order to explain what I mean. And we have Governor Reddy, who's been dealing with these problems all his life. But when I'm asked, about Planning Commission, I said the Planning Commission was started in 1950. In 1950, what was India? We think of one of the greatest problems we have is this imposition of the British rules, historians on our kismat. The British rule as some kind of a form of progress. Nothing has been more nonsensical than that. When they came, these figures are there in Paul Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Nations. By the way, please let me know how much time we have. No. I can't carry on because I have a throat also. In 1750, when statistics were first taken, India had, and as I said, this is in Paul Kennedy's book, which you should get actually. It's available. Paul Kennedy is a professor at Yale at this moment. India, oh, thank you so much. India, that means the whole of United India, had 24% of world manufacturing output. 24, when one good out of 4 anywhere in the world was made in India. China had 30. Between India and China, we had half the world's manufacturing. Not me, but by the time this young lady is alive, we will get back to half. We'll get back to half. I'm absolutely sure about that. But, you know, it reinforces my other view. Nobody comes to conquer a poor country. Nobody comes. Why would you want to conquer a poor country? The return must be worth the investment. As simple as that. Why would anyone want to conquer the deserts of Arabia or Persia until they found oil? Nobody was least bit interested. Britain in 1750 had 1.8%. If you want to have a statistical analysis of what colonization is all about, look at these figures. In 1950, India had 1.8 and Britain had 24%. Finished. It is so neat, it's almost as if it was artificially invented, but there it is. Indian goods in Caesar's Rome. In the market, there was a marketplace section which had Indian goods. This was a rich nation. It was a rich nation with poor people, of course. And it still remains a rich nation with poor people. In 1950, when Planning Commission started, 60%, there are no specific figures, but it is broadly estimated 60%, maybe 65%. Was living below the poverty line. And don't fool ourselves. Here in our country, the poverty line is extremely tenuous. Extremely tenuous. It is the difference between hunger and starvation. Nothing more than that. We don't know how the poor live. Last year, Ranganathan Commission submitted a report to then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, saying that the poverty line figure has come down to 30%. Now, if like you and me, we have had 3 meals and we haven't had a 4th because doctor has ordered us not to have 4th. No, you mustn't inflict this damage and serious injury upon your body. Don't eat too much fat. Don't do this, don't do that. You'll get diabetes. If you have had 3 meals, you will sit back and congratulate yourself. Look at it. We are 60%, we got it down to 30%. For me, that statistic is a crying shame. It's a shame. If it has taken us 65 years to bring it down from 60 to 30, is it going to take us another 60 years to bring it from 30 to 0? Do you think that the poor will wait that long? Why haven't they come to burn this hall down? I really want to know. Why haven't they come? Why aren't they coming now? It means 400 million people of this country are living below the poverty line. Another 200 million just above the poverty line. Last Sunday, I wrote in the Times of India on this great debate we are having on the land and landless and so on. You know, and it just surprised me. I said, we are so heavily engaged. Yes, there are legitimate issues on all sides. It's a part of a healthy process of debate in a democracy. But I said, why have I not heard a word? One word. It's called the landless. Why have we not heard about them? There are 200 million, or let us say at least 100 million households. That means 300 million people at least who are landless in rural areas. Which means they have no income. another at least 200 million people who have less than 2 bigha, which means that without agricultural labor they cannot survive. Now till the 60s, till the 70s, land had the ability. It was through land reform that we first brought in the first change. It had the ability through its productivity to become the basis of a shared economy. It no longer has that ability. Land has been divided and subdivided. Land no longer remains in many cases a viable unit in large parts of India. So why are we not thinking of 500 million people who have no option except jobs in some other non-agricultural sector? 20,000 people come to Delhi every day. Why are they coming to Delhi every day? I don't know how many come to Hyderabad. Do they come there to go and see Humayun's tomb or to see Red Fort? They come there because they can't eat, man. For 70 years, this country's poor has been running around looking for a job. For the first time, I tell you honestly, an effort is being made that jobs will look for the poor. Go and take it to the hinterland of India. Go and take it to where Nano was going to be built in Bengal. So that those people, those villagers don't have to rush some way or the other. We have created the largest migrant communities in this country. And then this is being held up. Correct it, let it go. How long is politics going to play a part of the industrialization process? Or how long is industrialization going to be blocked? Because of politics that becomes pettier and pettier and pettier. That is the challenge before us, that fourth challenge, before we can declare ourselves. The problem with Pakistan is that on all four counts, because of the nature of the state, not the nature of Pakistanis. As I said, Pakistanis are like us. You put them here, they would be different people. On all four counts, there has massive regression. Massive regression. Democracy is a fateful reality. We have today a nation that calls itself a democracy. The army has taken over half the courts, legally. The army determines foreign policy. It's the army chief which goes for foreign policy negotiation. It's not a state which is functioning as a democratic institution. Democracy is not simply the ability to vote once in 5 years. Democracy is the ability to function every day through civilian, proper, accountable institutions. In fact, I was speaking once in, I think, Hong Kong, and I said, democracy is not the right to speak sense. Even many dictators allow you to speak sense. Democracy is the right to speak nonsense. So, it is this challenge. Now, people have begun to realize in Pakistan that it's not working, but the emotive power of religion is so huge that nobody is ready to abandon a bad idea. There is no Bangladesh moment. But the worst problem is now that this idea, as states begin to fail to the west of Pakistan, we find that the idea of what I call the last resort, the romance of regression, is catching fire. We hear in the newspapers, every day you read that Islamic State, ISIS, Iraq, is the first Islamic State. Rubbish! The first Islamic State is Pakistan. The second Islamic State is Taliban Afghanistan, not King Zahir Shah's Afghanistan. Taliban Afghanistan. The third Islamic State is Boko Haram. Right there. We don't know in undefined geography. The Iraq experiment is the fourth. So how much more land now? You can see the spreading havoc. You can see Somalia gone to Al-Shabaab. Why is all this happening? There are many rational reasons for it, which probably require another, evening, including the fact that in most of these states, the post-colonial regimes were really charades. These states never saw independence. They saw various forms of neo-colonization. What is neo-colonization? Neo-colonization is the grant of independence as long as you don't exercise it. And this neo-colonization was in the hands of small elites. The people were never part of it. Yes, many of the more intelligent ones co-opted the middle class. But eventually, the only repository left for popular revolt was the mosque. Then you've eliminated the legislatures, the judiciary, every other instrument. What is left? So as usual, it's said that success has 100 fathers and failure, is a bastard. It's the other way around. Actually, failure there is 100 fathers. And success is non-existent. So within this realm, we are actually entering a very, very dangerous moment in our historical experience. At another level, as is usual in what is called multinational conflicts, it isn't that there is only one kind of war that is being fought. There are many kinds of war. Some on a parallel track. Some of these parallel sometimes swerve and intersect. Sometimes they have their own trajectory. So there are many kinds of war. But at one level, something phenomenally dangerous has happened. 100 years ago this year, the First World War began. Exactly 100 years ago, 101 years. Everybody knows that the First World War merged into the Second. Cause and consequence is well established, and anyone who's read a history book. What is less known is the consequence, is the transfer of the Second World War into the Third World War. What was the Third World War? The Third World War was a Cold War. We think of the Cold War as cold because nothing happened in Europe. But the rest of the world almost got blown up. It was pretty warm in Southeast Asia, Vietnam. It was pretty warm in Angola. It was pretty warm in Latin America. Just yesterday I was reading an article in Carter's time, Brzezinski, their Secretary of State or Security or whatever, National Security. He got, in Carter's time, mind you, I'm not even talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. He got the call at 3 o'clock, the dreaded call at 3 o'clock, informing him that 200 missiles had been launched from Russia. He told the person calling, double check. Meantime, put the American Strategic Command on alert. And he writes, he says that in exactly 28 minutes, everyone I have known is going to die. Everyone I have known is going to die. That is how close we were. And 2 minutes later, actually, they found it was a computer error and recalled the. No, this is as close. Can you imagine if that computer error had not been discovered? So we weren't living in any particularly safe world. Where did the Third World War begin? It began in Yalta and Tehran, where the victors of the Second World War, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, could not agree on the fate of Europe. So the moment the Axis powers were defeated, the Third World War began. Where did the Cold War end? Come on, easy guess. Where did it end? It ended in Afghanistan. Where did the Fourth World War, the war against terrorists, begin? It began in Afghanistan. Who were the principal antagonists of the Third World War. The allies of the Second World War fought the Third World War. The allies of the Cold War, which is the jihadi movement and America, are fighting the Fourth World War. They are fighting the Fourth. Because the management of victory is much more dangerous than the management of defeat. When you're defeated like Japan and Germany, you become calm, you go and start building cameras and Mercedes cars and live happily ever after. It's when you win, I'm Superman, you had it. Where is India in the Fourth World War? Now, two. The Second World War ended, the Third World War ended, the Fourth World War has looped back to join the First World War. Because the main areas, battlefields, are in those precise areas which emerged out of the nation states that were artificially created after Versailles Treaty. If you want to understand what is happening, I would suggest you go to your nearest map and take out all the boundaries created by the British. Just remove them. Suddenly you'll see a different world. And you'll see how close we are. And what is India? India is the Britain of the First World War. Like Britain, we have been fighting this war long before the Americans recognized that they had to fight. The first jihad was launched in 6 weeks after the partition. It's there in the records. The records of the British governors of Northwest Frontier. And that was the jihad for Kashmir. Those tribals. Proxy war, terrorist war. My book, The Shade of Swords, means the shadow armies. The war of shadow armies. Regular armies don't know how to deal with it. Because regular armies have to follow rules. They have to follow regulations. They can't use the barbarian methods of terrorism. And what happens if a recognized nation state becomes the citadel of this war? That's the problem. Today, Lakvi has been released because the government is not in control of the state. You come to this fascinating reality that between India and Morocco, there were only 3 governments. Only 3. I won't mention them. Only 3, maybe 3.5 governments which are in total control of their geography. Pakistan is certainly not in control of its geography. Now what happens? Nature abhors a vacuum. Even politics abhors a vacuum. It isn't as if nobody is in control. The people who are in control are militias. Some fighting in the name of Islam, some fighting in the name of tribalism, some fighting in the name of this, and some fighting in the name of that. But all they have in common is a vested interest in chaos. Because stability is dangerous to their existence. I'm not going to labor you with much more, but I'll end on this note. Don't ever imagine or underestimate the enemy. Don't think that they are all a bunch of fools, all hysterics, all throwing bombs at each other, all believing in this versions or that versions and so on. These are all what is it? What do babies suck? Sucker solutions that we keep to create comfort zones in our minds. All of them have objectives. All of them, by their own terms of reference, have objectives which are defined. They have a purpose, they have a goal, they have a horizon. The Al-Qaeda and ISIS are allies, fighting different elements of the same war. What is the nature of the enemy as defined by them? They have three enemies. One is the far enemy. This terminology is, by the way, from their literature. One is the far enemy. The far enemy consists, America, whatever the Western powers, whom they have fought. Look at it from their point of view. If an Afghan jihadi turns out and says, look, within the space of my lifetime, I have defeated the world's second most powerful superpower, Soviet Union, and today I have defeated America. Can you stop the child from being impressed? In one lifetime. From 1979 to today, 1980 to today, 35 years. Both the Soviet Unions and the Americans have been defeated. So he turns around and says, that's the far enemy. The second is the near enemy. Who is the near enemy? The near enemy are those forces. They may be forces of what I've called modernity. They may be forces representing faith equality. After all, those forces exist. Today when you hear that in Iraq, Yazidis have been thrown out. You hear in Iraq that Christians have been thrown out. Very bad news, but what does it also mean? It means that for 1400 years they lived. Nobody threw them out. For 1400 years of Muslim rule. So there are forces which believe in faith equality and coexistence. They have to be eliminated. So Al-Qaeda is fighting the enemy, far enemy. People like ISIS, Taliban are fighting both near as well as far enemy because they are alliances. But there is the third enemy. The third enemy are those nation states which have occupied quote-unquote Islamic space. That's where we enter. Because who is the successor state of the Mughal Empire? If Pakistan is the true successor state of the Mughal Empire, then Pakistan's footprint must extend to all Muslims. China, Xinjiang. If you have seen the list of nations upon whom Al-Qaeda has declared war, it's very interesting. You should check it out. It's there on the some website. Burma. Wherever there are Muslims, they have declared war. So this third element, the war against those who have occupied some form of imagined Islamic space, is the third. This will require tremendous strategic rethinking. This will require some very, a new approach, frankly, to our security policies, to our foreign policies also. That's an element of security policies, right? But come back. The problem with Pakistan is that, after 300 pages, that's my conclusion in Tinderbox, is that it has become a jelly state. What is a jelly state? Butter melts. Butter disappears. Jelly doesn't. Pakistan is not going to disappear. Nor is Pakistan going to fragment. The army is too powerful an institution. Don't have any illusions. But like jelly, it will always quiver. It will never be stable. And because it has radical fundamentalism and because it is a nuclear power, it will be an extremely toxic jelly state. And that is what we will have to devise our policies towards. You don't abandon negotiations, or you don't abandon a formal relationship. But perhaps you do what you can to even tell Pakistanis that, look, if you think that the danger is only for us in India, you're making a sorry mistake. One fact of public life I have seen at both the micro level and the macro level. Individuals, parties, nations. Nobody dies of murder. Everybody dies of suicide. It is the danger of being blown up in a kind of social suicide, in fragments, and then the consequences to us. That is the challenge of our politics. Thank you. Thank you very much.